Hello and welcome. I'm Derek Leach. Alongside me is Greg Koski, and we're here today with Mr. Barry Finsel, who is an Iraq War veteran. Mr. Finsel, what branch of service were you in?
I was in the United States Marine Corps.
Okay, and how long did you serve as a Marine?
Total of 10 years, 5 years active duty, and then 5 years in the reserves right after active duty.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why did you join the United States Marine Corps?
Well, to be honest, I flunked out of college. I graduated high school in 1996, went to college, graduated from Binghamton High School, went to Binghamton University, and could not handle it. And grades started dropping. Second semester was really poor, and as chance would be, the recruiter gave me a call. I made a promise that I would go in and see him the next day. And when I went in and saw him, it was hook, line, and sinker, sign me up. So that was my easy escape from failure in college.
I heard second semester is always the hardest, so that's what I heard.
Now, people seem to have a lot of preconceived notions about boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
That's very intense, very rigorous training. What is boot camp really like?
Okay, boot camp is kind of like, it's an intense training period where you essentially get spun up on military life, get trained in the bare essentials. For the Marine Corps, that's 3 months long. It's like 12, 13 weeks. And you essentially go in, you're referred to as a recruit, everything's in the third person, there's no I, because we believe in teamwork, so there's always this recruit, this recruit, that. And it's broken down into 3 phases. Essentially the first phase is a breakdown period. I mean, you're literally kind of beat into the ground, you drill, you learn military knowledge, you do a lot of physical training. It's I don't know, it's a beating down phase. That's what I would refer to it as. The second phase is more like a team building phase. You start going into more advanced things. You start doing combat training, things of that nature. You start taking up riflery, things of that. And then your last phase is like, any other little additional nuanced training that you have to endure. And then if you cannot meet certain criteria, they recycle you back to new platoons, and you have to kind of start all over from scratch. Mm-hmm. So it's a 13-week, 3-month training period for boot camp.
Now, because you were a Marine, were you aware of any special training that you got, as opposed to, Army boot camp or something like that?
Well, I know that the Marine boot camp is the longest and most difficult out of all the branches, armed forces branches. But all Marines go to boot camp. Once you're done with boot camp, you go on to your military occupational specialty school, we call MOS school, and from there, that's where you go and get trained into a specialized field. If you are going to be an infantry Marine, you go to the School of Infantry in North Carolina. If you are going to be you're going to be trained in anything but infantry, like in the service support, you go to a school called Marine Combat Training, which is, I think about a couple weeks to a month long, and that essentially trains you in the basic infantry-like tactics. And then after that school, you go on to your MOS school. Like for myself, I was a ground radio repairman, so I went to California, was trained in basic electronics, radio fundamentals, and then ground radio repair. So in a sense, even though I was not an infantry Marine, every Marine is trained as a rifleman, because you go to MCT and you're expected to be able to deploy your weapon and go to combat and know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I understand that you have been to Iraq twice.
Yes.
When did you first leave for Iraq?
I first left for Iraq, strangely enough, when I finished my 5 years of active duty in North Carolina. I came back home to Binghamton, and I had joined a reserve unit in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And after 4 months of joining that unit was activated to go to Iraq. So it's kind of strange that my entire 5 years in active duty, I essentially was stationed stateside in North Carolina, brief time in California, and went to some schools in the U.S. But as soon as I got back home and joined the reserves, that's when I got mobilized for my first deployment to Iraq. And that was January of 2003.
Wow. Okay. And what was it like when you first arrived in Iraq?
Well, if you could ever imagine like a Hollywood movie, where it's like takes place in a desert and you see like roaming sand hills and things like that. That's what I thought it would be. When we left, we flew out of Cherry Point, North Carolina, and then we flew into Shannon, Ireland, and then stopped over in Larnaca, Cyprus, and then stopped into Kuwait. And this whole time, you know, we were not exposed to anything foreign around us, so it didn't really seem like we were anywhere different.
Right.
And then once we got to Kuwait, we spent some time in a Marine base in Kuwait. And after a certain period of time, when we got ready for the land invasion in Iraq, we drove in at nighttime into a Jalaba airfield in southeastern Iraq. And even there, you know, it didn't really feel like I was anywhere different because I was not exposed to the culture, different culture. I mean, I was in a desert, and I was in a desert in California, so it was kind of like the same thing, maybe a little bit more blowing, wind blowed a little bit more. It's more hotter. Didn't feel like I was anywhere different. The only time I felt that I was in a different place is the times that I was in Kuwait. So there was times I had to drive into Kuwait City, and once you got into Kuwait City, you're exposed to different culture. You see different cars, different people, different buildings, signs, so you know you're not anywhere close to home. And the other time, too, is when driving into Iraq and driving out of Iraq for the invasion. Again, it was at nighttime, and what was really neat is that they had burning oil fields. And when we drove in there at nighttime in our convoy, we actually did a security halt near one of these burning oil fields. And what was really, really cool, that it was almost like it was like midday. It was so bright, it was so warm, even though it was like 2, 3 in the morning. So that was neat. That was something you would never experience. And also, too, driving around, you see blowing up tanks, blowing up houses, things of that nature. Convoying out of Iraq, we did that in the daytime, and that was much more safer because, you know, all the mission work that we needed to do was taken care of. We had essentially won. We were leaving. We were changing over with the Army, so we convoyed out in the daytime. So at this point, I got to actually see like the Iraqi houses and stuff, and it was very sad because there's a lot of barbed wire. There's houses that don't have roofs. There's kids running around all over the place. I remember on the highway, I always called it the highway of death because I guess that if you kept on driving it north, it would go into Baghdad. And it was very interesting to see, like, there was a lot of white pickup trucks. I think sometimes, somehow in the movies, I don't know, you see a lot of white pickup trucks and you think that's like what terrorists drive, and then all of a sudden over there you see all these white, like, Mazda pickup trucks and like, whoa, it's actually real. But I saw a lot of them, and what was neat is that all the Iraqi people at that time were all waving and smiling and giving us thumbs up and peace signs, and there's something good about that. There's something that made you felt good, maybe right. That, you know, we're doing something good, and they actually wanted us to be here and help them out. But those are my experiences, I guess, the first time I was down there. I mean, the only things that I was afraid of down there the first time was unexploded ordnance, aka like mines, because you don't know where they're at. And the problem with a desert is that if anything is exposed, the wind will conceal it immediately. So you never know where you're stepping, and you always try to stay in your footprints anywhere you go. The other thing was Scuds, getting a Scud missile launched at you. When the invasion started, we had Scuds launched at us, and that was a crazy, crazy time because you had to essentially grab all your gear, no matter what you were doing, rifle, gas mask, and run to the bunkers. And after a while, your mind starts playing tricks on you because there's 2 alarms. There was an audible, like, you know, like a siren that would go off, and then if you heard that, you know, as a Marine, you're supposed to repeat all calls. So you obviously can't replicate that siren, so what you would do is at the top of your lungs, you'd start screaming, bunkers, 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 so in case somebody didn't hear the siren. And what got maddening after a while is that you obviously take these things seriously, so all of a sudden, you know, you're kind of just like chilling out or whatever, doing something, and all of a sudden did I hear that? Was that bunkers? It was bunkers. And then your mind starts, you know, you start hearing things. And so, of course, you're not going to take it for granted because if it is true and you're just like, you know, whatever, you could get blown up. So running back and forth to the bunkers was a hard thing. And, you know, having to maintain a gas mask was very difficult because that was the last thing I was always afraid of, is getting gassed. So in order to abate that fear, you have to have a pristine gas mask. And it's very difficult to have a mask that is clean when you're in an environment that's got nothing but dust and sand and dirt that would cause a breach in your seal and cause for mechanical failure of your canister. So those, I mean, those are kind of like, you know, the things the first time around that I was kind of a little bit afraid of, and my experience the first time around of in a new environment in that airfield in Iraq.
Now, where were you stationed when you were in Iraq?
First time?
Yes.
Okay, first time, but when we were in Kuwait, I think the name was either was Camp Tarawa, and then once we went into Iraq, again it was Jalaba Airfield, and it was renamed Camp Viper. So like the whole strategy was in Iraq the first time was almost similar to the island hopping campaign of World War II in the Pacific, whereas you know you would grab a base just so that you could extend how far your planes could fly out for refueling purposes. Well, this time around we would do the same thing, but instead of obviously islands, we would take over air bases to extend how far helicopters could drop out supplies. So we would only go as far as helicopter transport could take us. So Camp Viper in Iraq, that's the airfield that we supported when I was there the first time.
Now, can you perhaps describe what, say, like a typical day would be like in Iraq?
Well, a typical day, I think it was, a typical day varied because the first time was completely different from the second time. The second time I was over in Iraq, I was a military policeman, and I was stationed in Camp Fallujah, which was next to a city, which was next to something that was very visually different, instead of being in Camp Viper, which is in the middle of nowhere at an airfield. And the first time around, I mean, a typical day, you'd get up in the morning, you do your hygiene, because hygiene is important. You know, you got to shave, and you don't have running water. You have water. That's one thing too. We had bottled water from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, which was a luxury, I think, because you know, we're trained to take like regular pond water and put some chlorine tablets in there, and it's fit for consumption, but it's not the best tasting stuff around. So, you know, we'd take stuff like a bottle of water, and then we'd go and somehow figure out a way to heat it up, and then try shaving. In the morning, we'd eat our meals, and then we'd go about and do our daily business, and, you know, we'd have our 3 squares, whatever. We'd have to pull guard duty at times. If we needed to go to a different location, we'd, you know, go and do that. The first time around really wasn't bad. We had, in terms of our berthing areas, we had 2-man tents that we'd utilize. Some people actually had large general purpose tents that they would all berth in. But I, myself and another Marine, we decided to live essentially right next to where we worked because we were being lazy, because that was the easiest way to save time and sleep in the mornings. That would minimize the distance traveled from where you sleep to where you work. And so essentially we had our Marines dig a small little bunker, and we had it lined with sandbags, and I slept on one cot and he slept on the other cot for the entire time under the, you know, no roof, no nothing, just cami net and the stars. In terms of hygiene, like real deal hygiene, like taking showers and stuff, that was another luxury. Like we used to go anywhere. I mean, I myself, the longest time I didn't shower was like a week and a half. And typically you'd have to go to an engineer's section, which is down the road. And it was kind of weird because you'd go at nighttime because all the water during the day would heat up. And so you had warmer water. And so you'd go in there and you'd do something called Navy showers. You'd essentially get in, wet yourself, soap, rinse, and get the hell out. Right. And the funny thing is, like, you go there, you get clean, and you're walking back, and you've got all this sand, and we used to call it moon dust because it was just so fine. It's like confectioner's sugar. I mean, it's just powder. So you get there, get clean, get back, and you're dirty again. So it's like, you know, why even fight it? Be one with the filth, and then you'll be A-okay. There was no restrooms. We had, in Iraq, we had trenches to do number 1 in, and for the other bodily function, we had plywood constructed crappers, which essentially there's a square hole, and underneath it was a half of a fuel can waiting to collect your stuff, and in that fuel can there was diesel fuel. And as part of the chores every morning, as a Marine was selected to literally stir the pot while it burnt, they would burn off the refuse and stuff. So that was never a glamorous job, and so usually that was given to Marines that, were some behavior, discipline problems, things like that. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of a typical day the first time. The second time, when I went to Camp Fallujah, which was in 2005, everything was more built up. So it wasn't like we got there, invaded, set up this hasty little camp. We had been there for some time, so we had bigger resources, better resources. We actually had a chow hall, and they served meals like 4 times a day. I mean, there was Baskin Robbins there. I mean, it was really good eating. I mean, Marines could really get fat. I mean, like overweight over there. So food was never, ever, ever a problem. We always had MREs, which is little bag rations we had anyhow. Okay. We also lived in a trailer park, or that's what we called it, which had little small trailers that you'd share, depending on your rank, a couple Marines to a trailer. We had gyms in there in Camp Fallujah. We had phone centers. We had a PX, which is like a little store you buy little knickknacks and stuff in. It wasn't bad the second time. There's a lot more accommodations the second time around. I myself, I did not live in the trailer park because, again, I will be honest, I was a little lazy because there's just not, to me, not worth it walking all the way down to the trailer parks at night and then coming all the way back to where you work in the morning.
Right.
Didn't like it. And the second part to it is that since we were at military police, we ran operations around the clock. And since I was in charge of running the armory, I took my job very seriously because I wanted to make sure that I was always available to the Marines if they had any problems with any of the weapons, because the weapons is the only thing that's going to save their life while being out on the road. Okay. So second time around, I think it was a lot easier again in terms of like living accommodations rather than the first time.
Huh. So the second time it was a lot different than the first
Absolutely, completely different.
Now, when was the first time that you saw combat?
Well, I never was directly involved in combat if you define combat as raising your weapon and returning fire. I have been in situations where I didn't have to fire my weapon, but we were taking fire, or in situations that were potentially nasty. A couple times we were going out on, and I would have to say this is more the second time. The first time around, again, I was in the middle of nowhere. I think my greatest fear is that at nighttime having to go to the trench to do my business, and I always was paranoid that I'd be there doing my business, and then there's some bad guy with night vision goggles. Like, oh, look at this guy, we'll take him out right now. So I never had those worries the first time. The second time, however, the greatest problems came being on the road. And on the road, you have a different kind of enemy. And the different kind of enemy is the IEDs that you hear of, the improvised explosives devices. So if you can define combat by saying being in proximity to those things, or being shot at with indirect fire, being like mortars and cannons and stuff, or driving through a convoy and being shot at, then yes, then that's combat. But again, I never had the opportunity to raise my weapon and return fire in those manners. I think the worst situation, or the scariest, was during the Iraqi constitution or elections they had. We had to go into Iraq, into Fallujah, and our job was to provide security for a transportation support company to drop concrete barriers at intersections, and that was to prevent suicide vehicles from coming through and blowing things up. And it was really weird because you're there at nighttime, and everything's done at nighttime. So you're essentially making yourself a target because they know you're there. And then the hardest thing to do is you have a very compartmentalized function. You're there, this squad is providing security for this section. This vehicle is providing security for this. So you got to focus only on that. But then you hear traffic and you hear people saying, oh, look over here. Did you hear that? Da, da, da. Yeah, I had shots down there. So instinctively you want to turn around and see what the heck's going on, but you have to focus on your sector. I remember one time we were at a security point in Fallujah, and it was pitch black. And there was like, and this is in one of these silly, stupid scenes out of a movie, and it was so surreal, is that there was like one of these little light bulbs kind of hanging down from in front of some house or whatever, and it was just really bothering me. So I went over there with my rifle and I smashed it because I didn't want to be seen, because I have night vision goggles, but they don't. So I could see them, I don't want them to see me.
Right.
So I did things like that. There was one time we were driving into a place called Zidon, and we're driving around, and all of a sudden we see some dead bodies on the ground. And like the bad guys are really smart, because they like, you know, human curiosity, oh, dead bodies. No, let's keep driving. No, we got to investigate it. And so what they do is that they have dead bodies in the ground, and they have grenades underneath them. And they take the safety pin out, so as soon as you roll them over, kaboom. So we, you know, encountered some dead bodies, and we held security there, and we were like, you know, we're not checking this out. This is in Recon's area of operations. We'll let Recon deal with it. So, you know, did things like that. You know, I was in charge of a section of 2 squads of Marines. So, and I had those squads at various times came under fire. They had firefights and stuff. So, you know, I was exposed to it in that nature. I think one of the hardest things, even, and I don't know what's worse, I don't know if it's worse to be directly in combat or to see those around you get in combat and come back and be screwed up. Like I had a bunch of Marines. There was one Marine that got blown up, a vehicle-borne, or no, it was a regular IED had blown up, roadside bomb, and he was critically injured, and they medevaced him to Fallujah, and I was there when they brought him in, and he was all purple. They thought he was going to lose his arm, and they flew him out of there to Baghdad, and he went back home. There's a couple times too, like when you're the armorer, you're issuing out weapons every day, so you really know the Marines a lot. Even the Marines that are not in your squad, they still come to you for weapons. So sometimes, I was also assistant operations chief, so I was in charge of knowing where everyone's at, what's going on, the missions and stuff like that. And when you hear that, oh, a squad's hit, Johnson's hit, or you know, Lochner's hit, da-da-da. So all of a sudden you start running through your head, what the heck's going on? I want to know an answer. Are they okay? What's the severity of the medevac? Is it routine? Is it urgent? Is it critical? Are they getting flown out? What the hell happened?
Right.
So that was always an unnerving thing. And you know, you could hear like, oh, he's got an urgent medevac, and you're thinking that's the worst. And then a couple hours later, it's like, oh yeah, I got blown up and just, you know, scratched my face, you know. Something like, oh, thank God. You know, it's never good, but you know, stuff like that can be very, very bothersome. So, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Okay. Well, so you spoke of you were in not necessarily direct combat, but you were like
In hostile areas.
You're in hostile areas. Were there any or many casualties that you witnessed or that you?
Well, here's the thing. When you're on well, depending on your mission, if you're going from A to B to provide security for a convoy and you get into some kind of mess, you never stick around to see what you do. You just keep pushing, and then that's it. Because you stick around, you cause yourself even more problems. The destruction that was very apparent caused by all the fighting was everywhere. Like Fallujah was, you know, bullet holes everywhere, things blown up. I mean, you could see mortars tossed in the air. I mean, really bad. And then also, too, every night you'd get a briefing on things that went on, not necessarily in Fallujah, but in the surrounding area, like in Ramadi or Nasser, Wasser, Al Salim, crazy places. And then you get briefed, and like you would know like everything that went on. And also, too, being in operations, you know what goes on in the what had happened that day with your Marines and Marines somewhere else. Like I had Marines that was from my reserve unit, was at another MP detachment that was at Al Taqadum, and he got blown up like twice, got 2 Purple Hearts and stuff. So like you know things by word of mouth, you know things by working with people. We had an EOD, an explosive ordnance Marine who died. They're the ones who defuse bombs and stuff like that. We had one Marine, sadly, in our platoon that was fatally wounded in a friendly, non-combatant type incident. I had one Marine, and this is very traumatizing for him, and I remember like he came up to me like, Staff Sergeant, I'm like, oh, what's going on, man? And he's like, oh, yeah. He was just so disillusioned. Like, what happened? He's like, we went to some security point, and there was a car that was coming towards the recon's checkpoint, and the car didn't stop. And the car kept going, and the recon opened fire on it. And they went to go inspect the car because they thought it possibly could have been a suicide vehicle. Mm-hmm. And it later turned out, you know, just like there's stupid drivers in America, there's stupid drivers in Iraq, there's stupid drivers everywhere. And he was so upset because, you know, there was a man that was driving the car and there was a woman that was in the passenger seat, and he was just saying that the bodies were just absolutely grotesque. Like bullets chewed everything up. I mean, brains all over the place. I mean, this kid was always a motivated, you know, happy-go-lucky, but this was very sobering for him. And this happened to a lot of Marines, you know, that was in direct combat or were exposed to certain things. I felt so bad for the Marines there was a unit called Mortuary Affairs, and their job was to recover dead bodies. So like if a Marine got blown up, they'd call Mortuary Affairs, and their job was to go out there and collect the remains of that body so they could send it home immediately for proper burial and things of that nature. So that probably would have been a very tough job to have done, being over there, being in Mortuary Affairs.
Now you talk about the differences between the first time that you went to Iraq and the second time. What is it like to come home from Iraq and know that you're going to be safe for a while, and then find out that you have to go back? I mean, what is that emotion like?
To be honest, I was so happy to come back the first time. It's kind of like I've always believed that you can't appreciate anything until it's taken away from you. And in this extreme, I remember finding the first time I was like, oh, you know, I used to listen to Guns N' Roses, you know, Paradise City, because not because of the women, you know, I don't want to be sexist on film, on camera, but I always take me down to the Paradise City where the grass is green. Green was something that you were always stripped of. Everything was all tan and brown and dull and boring. And so I always told myself, you know, when I get home, I want to surround myself with water. When I got home, I bought myself a boat. I was really happy. You know, when we left and we flew into Germany, I remember looking out of the airplane and we saw all this lush green trees and foliage, and I mean, it was wonderful. Now, when I came back, I stayed in the reserves. A lot of people bolted because they figured, well, one deployment, I'm not doing this again. And I didn't think that this would happen again. And I love the Marine Corps very, very much. I mean, it's you know, it's shaped my life in many ways, and it's a very fulfilling institution for me. So I made myself a promise that if this happens again, that I will not stay in the Marine Corps, because it's, you know, I got out of active duty to try to become a teacher and go to school, and this deployment was in the middle of my graduate education, and it's just like if you stop learning and you have to pick it back up, it's twice as hard.
Right.
So I didn't want the disruptions anymore. Coming home, it was nice. I made the mistake the first time of like letting everyone know I was home, because after going and going and going, because there's no holidays, there's no weekends over there. You just keep, every day is the same day. It's Groundhog's Day all over. So when you come home, you're excited to see people, but at the same time you're selfish in that you want your time to yourself.
Right.
You just want to veg out. You don't want people to know you're home. You just want to find the spot on the couch, put in a movie, stuff your face with your favorite food, and just live like a hog for a couple days, and then come out and see the air and the light and then meet people. I didn't do that when the first time I came home, and I never had time to myself. And it was so hard to try to be nice to greet people, but at the same time thinking, will you just please leave? I'd like to go nap now. Mm-hmm. So that was, you know, a couple of things I had experienced coming back the first time. And, you know, like I said, the first time wasn't as bad. Right. It wasn't as bad. The second time, I made sure I didn't tell too many people I was coming home. But the second time, you know, it was more difficult for me because I made good on my promise that I wasn't going to join the military anymore. So coming home, I knew I was leaving the military. So I was not only coming home from a deployment, but leaving the military altogether. And I had a very, very, very difficult time adjusting to normal, routine civilian life. You know, and I came home in the summer of 2006. So here it is, the January 2008. So it's been almost a year and a half. And even though a year and a half later, there's still things which I have a hard time adjusting. And it might sound so stupid, because in the military, everything's task-oriented. It's compartmentalized. You don't have to worry about where you live, or getting fed, or getting medical care, or getting clothes. All that stuff's taken care of for you. You get paid, and the only thing you got to worry about is doing your job, and you have a very specific task and job, and that's all you do. And that, not having to worry about everything else, allows you to put 110% of your energies into your task and to do it well. So now not being in that narrow compartmentalized environment, I'm like, okay, what do I do? You know, if I was sick, I would go down to BAS, get seen just like that. I'm sick now? Okay, make an appointment for 2 weeks. 2 weeks? What gives? This isn't, you know, doesn't seem right. So that was always a problematic thing. And also, too, like, if you are accustomed to a certain way of life, you know, like, and even this is the same thing even for right now, like, when you live under harsh conditions, the most stupid and insignificant of niceties here, which you probably could care less about, is like the world to me. So, like, for instance, the second time in Iraq, when I slept essentially in my armory, which was like the back of a tractor trailer, there's no heat in there. I had one little silly space heater in there. It was cold, it sucked, you know, and now, you know, my tolerance for the cold is, you know, a lot better than someone else's, and if I have the ability to get warm, you know, I'm living high on life, whereas everyone else is like, oh my God, it's so cold. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's great. Or I get, you know, I don't know. I guess you taste life differently when you are deprived of certain things.
Definitely. So you've spoken of many experiences that you've had while in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any that was really your most memorable experience?
I don't know memorable on how you want to define memorable. Memorable can be bad, memorable could be good.
Mm-hmm. Anything that really sticks out in your mind, like if you think about the years that you were in Iraq, was there anything that really pops out as like?
What pops out to me is that I've always thought this, that if you're doing a specific task or you have a job to do, what is the end result?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have always kind of pondered to myself, and I was always kind of the black sheep of many Marines in my unit, because I always tried to think of what are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? And that kind of crystallized with me when that one Marine in my platoon died, because I always thought to myself, you know, what do you tell this Marine's parents? He died for what? You know, if it was like World War II and you're fighting against the Nazi invaders, you could say, well, he died giving his life to fight against oppression from Nazis, brutality. Or, you know, say it was the Civil War, you know, this guy is protecting a trench and he goes in there. He gave his life to valiantly save against the Southern rebels or whatever. Or here I couldn't come up with a good explanation to say or to justify why people die. Mm-hmm. And I looked at the loss of life as very needless. And that bothered me to a very large degree. Memorable. I think the second time, what was memorable for me was at the end. I was coming from a reserve unit. Part of the motivations that kind of pushed me forward the second time is that, like I said, after the first deployment, everyone in the reserve unit bolted. And I was actually left in charge. I was a sergeant at the time, and I was like the senior most enlisted person after everyone left. And there was like a master sergeant, 3 gunnies, a staff sergeant, and then there was me as a sergeant, and then some other sergeants left. So I was kind of like the enlisted head person in charge. And we had gotten a whole bunch of brand new Marines. They were literally boots. You know, they're little kids. And so I was always worried about them the second deployment because, you know, if you've got a Marine who doesn't know what's going on, he could be in an unsafe situation or he could be taken advantage of. You know, he'd get, you know, crap jobs to do and get abused, and I would never want that to happen. So at the conclusion of the second deployment, when everyone made it back to the unit, including the guy that got blown up and medevaced, he made it back okay. You know, I felt a great sense of accomplishment that I was able to steward these Marines through this process, take them over there all in one piece, bring them back mostly all in one piece, and through the process know that these Marines matured enough to the point where I knew in the back of my head they don't need me. Whereas to begin with, I knew they would need my guidance and my fellow sergeants' guidance as well. Whereas, you know, they grew up. It was a sobering experience. I knew that they could take care of themselves. So that was a memorable moment. I remember the first time, and this really upset me. We had a mess tent where they had satellite news pumped in there all the time. And every day, every night, we always had the headlines. You know, today in the invasion in Iraq, blah, 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 blah. And then I remember the day that we weren't the first news story. And it was the whole Lacey Peterson missing and potential murder trial. I'm like, oh, we're now back burner to this. And like, at this point, that's where I felt, and this is where America's zeal is going to be on the decline, where we're not the cool thing anymore. We're not the #1 thing on everyone's mind, but okay, this is old, this is boring, this is stale. And that's not to say that people don't appreciate and understand and support us. I just know that this is the point where we're second. We're second. And if you're going to go somewhere and put people in harm's way for some objective that I wasn't too sure of what it was, I think that should be always #1 priority concern.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that, I think, like I said, I think the most memorable positive thing is coming home. Oh, you know, actually the most memorable moment that I can think of, it was actually like I said, it did not occur in Iraq. It actually occurred coming back to the States. And I remember like when we were at Lejeune, we were so anxious to do all our medical screening, turn in our gear, and get on the bus and drive back to Allentown. Then I remembered when we were on the bus and we were driving back up, and finally it was like a 8-9 hour ride to Allentown. I remember when we were on the highway, just getting ready to go on the exit for Airport Road, which is our reserve unit. They had state troopers that were blocking everything off, and there was the fire trucks that had ladders extended with the flag down. And I just remember I got really teary, and I felt so proud because, like, you know, the troopers were stopping traffic and saluting us. The same, I mean, it was an overwhelming feel of respect from everyone else, and it's like I never forgot how that felt. And it wasn't as grand the second time, because the first time is always the best experience. The second time, okay, yeah, I know what to expect, and it's not as good, but it still feels really, really good to get that kind of genuine attention when you come home. And I don't know, I'm running my mouth here because this is a dangerous thing to allow me to talk. The Marine who actually got blown up, his name was Lance Corporal Davis. And this is funny because when we were in the reserves before we deployed, myself and another sergeant who I was very close with, we were in charge of this platoon, and we looked at Davis, and this guy was like, you know, we had questions about him. Questions being that, you know, you need to be able to trust your Marines no matter what. And we didn't think this guy had what it took. And so we were always focused in on him, and we used to get in his face, and we really, I mean, give him the heavy, hard hand of love. And he impressed the hell out of me by his actions in Iraq, because he was a machine gunner, and he got blown up, and he did everything he could, and he distinguished himself, and he got medevaced. And so I you know, was always concerned for his well-being. And when we got home, he was there. So that was the first time I had seen him since the time I saw him being flown out of Fallujah, all purple and banded up and just in a world of hurt. And so, like, he had, you know, he was all good, and he had a huge bandage on his arm, was doing all sorts of surgeries. And, you know, the idea is when you come back to your unit is to turn in weapons, get the information, and get the hell out of there so you can go on liberty and, you know, be with your loved ones and stuff. Right. And I told my captain that I wanted to do one thing before we left. And the captain knew about Davis being blown up and stuff, and he was there. But one of the last things we did in Iraq is we bought flags, and what we did is we would go to a maintenance unit, and we would go up there and take the flag and run it up in the sky for a day and have it run it down. And then we get a little thing saying that this flag was flown over Camp Fallujah on this day from this time period. So we had gotten that, we got some money to buy a flag, we did it, we got a little certificate, and we presented that to Davis right before we secured for living. We called him up there because I thought to myself, you know, this guy was the worst guy screwed up in our platoon, and he's been here. And I don't think he's able to share in the respect that we had getting off of a bus,
Right.
being completely different. So we distinguished him, brought him out there, read his citation, gave that to him, and gave him his 5 minutes of fame that he deserved. And so that was a very, very memorable moment that, you know, I think everyone felt proud of, and he did as well.
That is truly incredible. Like, I am amazed at everything you've just, all those memories and everything. But I know we're kind of going on the other end of the things now, but if you had anything that really frightened you, I know you've discussed, like, you've seen dead bodies when you're driving by, and you see, like, you know that the grenades are sort of attached to them, and that one wrong move can lead to disaster. So is there anything that really frightened you?
Here's the thing. When you have a faceless enemy, you're always afraid. Like, if I knew you're a bad guy, I could see you. I can react and respond. I can take steps to distance myself and take you out before you take me out. But when you can't see the bad guy, you don't know where he's coming from, and he's got these dirty bombs that look like ordinary things, you get very paranoid. And when being on the road with these IEDs, you know, you're driving around, and your job is to detect them. And so, how do you detect them? Well, if you drive, the only way to detect them is to always be on the road, which is the unsafest place to be. If you're always on the road, you become intimately familiar with what that road is, the layout of that road. And then after a while, you realize, that wasn't there before, or that's missing. So those are the biggest heads up to there's something wrong here. And then you have to go detect a bomb. And these bombs, they're like artillery shells, anti-tank mines. They're buried in roads. There's tripwires. They're remote detonated. They're stuffed in cardboard boxes. They're stuffed in inner tubes. They're stuffed in roadkill carcasses. And the problem is that it's not like you're driving down the Northway, although there is some litter on the Northway. Driving in Fallujah, there's litter all over the place. So it's so hard to discriminate against what is garbage and what is a bomb, concealed in what looks to be trash. So going up there and we say, oh, security halt, and then you have to go out there and check it. I mean, visually check it. You'd walk up to it and you'd kick it. And if it kicked and it blew away, whew, okay, no bomb. If you kick it, ding, it's heavy metal. I mean, an artillery round is solid. Get back to the vehicle ASAP, call EOD, cordon off the area so no one else comes in, and you deal with it that way. I mean, when we were on foot, the worst is foot patrols, because you're actually right there. And I remember being in Fallujah, and I was walking there, and it seemed to be a wire sticking out of the ground. I'm like, I looked at it, you know, I was like, oh, sugar. Go up to it, and I look, and it's okay. It was really a piece of debris. But you have to really, I mean, you can't take anything for granted.
Right.
And the sick, twisted thing is, when you're first there, if you pardon the expression, it feels like you're clinched up tight. You know, if you're ever driving and it's in the snow and you're driving along and all of a sudden you lose traction for that half a second, your heart starts racing, You're like, oh my God. And then you regain it and you're like, oh, okay. Well, that's how you feel the entire time you're there the first time. And then after, like I said, here's the sick part. And after a while, this stuff becomes common. So it's like, oh, I think there's a bomb there. Oh, okay. Well, radio back. So and it's kind of unnerving because like when we got there, we were doing changeover with the guys that were there. We thought it was very odd that these guys were kind of like so passé because they were so desensitized to these things. Our MP platoon was right across the street from an artillery battery. So every day, every now and then, like, boom! I mean, just everything would shatter. I mean, I'm a jumpy person to begin with, and these things just drive you nuts.
Right.
But then again, after a while, it's like you get desensitized, and when you get desensitized, that's why I think, you know, it's a good thing they rotate people in and out, because complacency kills. If you lose that fear, you lose your edge, and something bad can happen. driving on the road. We went to this place, another air base called Al Assad, and the whole thing is like, always stay in the hard ball, stay on the pavement, because you can't bury something under the pavement.
Right.
Don't cut corners. You go in a dirt spot, you're done. Well, there's this road that literally starts off paved and it starts disintegrating into, like, you know, chunks of asphalt, and then it finally turns into a dirt road, and then it reverts back to a road. And I remember I'm not driving, but I'm in charge of a vehicle. My driver is driving, and I'm just like, you know, just, oh my God, bracing myself for the dart patch, and like, whew, okay, there's nothing there. And I remember this is a funny thing, and it's not funny, but it's funny to me.
Right.
So there was a patch. There's a patch in the ground on the road, and so we're driving there, and the driver decides, well, the Humvee is, the road is not wide enough where the Humvee could go to the left or to the right. So one side of the Humvee is going to hit that dirt spot. Driver's like, So he took and drove the passenger side over the dirt spot. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, well, if there's a bomb, we're going to get hit. And if it's going to be you or me, it's going to be you. Okay? And I'm like, oh. You know, it was kind of funny when I was like, you know, you jerk. But that's how things are. I mean, it's like you can't see things coming. It just, there's a couple times, too, like we were driving from Al Assad to TQ. And we were going at nighttime. We had a security halt. And all of a sudden, a convoy ahead of us got hit. So it was one of these things like, well, that could have been us. There was a time where one of my squads went out. And when I go with that squad, I have a particular spot I always like, a particular truck I like sitting in, because there's just that group of Marines I'm the tightest with. And there's always, I always sit behind the driver. I was just out of habit. And they went out on the road, and I was going to go out with them that night, and they got hit. They ran over a mine, triple stack mine, that was concealed in a puddle of water. And the back half of it was blown off. And when they got back and saw the Humvee, I was thinking, wow, you know, that's where I could have been sitting. I mean, that Humvee got totaled, and there was a 50 caliber machine gun got thrown off. I mean, all sorts of stuff. So there was a lot of, you know, what ifs. I could have been in that situation. Like, it's hard, because sometimes as an operations chief, you got to decide what squads have what missions. So you have your favorites. You don't want to put them in harm's way. You don't want to cherry pick them. You know, and it's kind of like you look at them, okay, next mission. Okay, your guys are next in pipe to go. You guys go. So there's always kind of a thing on the back of your mind, too, of like, what have you just got your Marines into? Right. There was one operation, and I'll probably get in trouble if I say the names of it. There's just one operation where they wanted to lure the bad guys out. And to lure the bad guys out, they're going to have a fake convoy with fake security. And I was like, no, we are not, you know, I'm completely against this. You know, trouble's out there. Trouble will find you when trouble wants to. Do not go looking for it. There's no need to put our Marines in danger for this. Right. And they end up doing the stupid operation anyhow, and nothing came of it. But, you know, those things are very bothersome in terms of, like, fear, because, you know, it's there. When you go outside the base, you are now in unknown territory.
It's like you're walking right into it with it.
Yeah. I mean, other things I was afraid of, and here's another, this is crazy too. When we left, I was so used to, and the Marines were so used to being MPs. So MPs, we have all this kinds of crazy things to kill and blow stuff up. 50 cal machine guns, an automatic grenade launcher called a Mark 19, grenades that will literally melt through engine blocks. I mean, all sorts of lovely little tools. But when we left, we were a troop. So we were subject to the protection of the new MPs that just came over. So we felt very helpless being in the back of a troop carrier, having to get from Fallujah to TQ to fly out. And so it was like, enemies, the bad guys don't tangle with armored Humvees that have huge machine guns, because they don't have the means to fight back. They mess with supply trucks. They mess with troop trucks. So being sandwiched in the middle of a troop truck and feeling kind of helpless, that was kind of scary to me. And I don't like flying. So even though I was glad to leave and I was up in the air, I was thinking, you know what, I've got through all this. Something's going to happen. I'm going to crash in the ocean. It's going to crash here, crash there. It's got to happen. So that sounds like a really silly fear, but I'm not a fan of flying.
So you talk about becoming complacent. Is that the best way to kind of cope with the trauma that you see on almost an everyday basis?
No, I guess maybe if you kind of relate it back to the first time, you try to be clean. It's natural instinct to shower once, at least once, twice a day. Keep yourself in a relatively good state of health, and if you keep trying to get dirty, I'm like, why fight it? Whereas if you're in danger, that you're, and I'm not saying that you become complacent. I'm saying that you become desensitized to a point where it does not make you paranoid and neurotic as much as it did before. But there becomes a point where I think if you're desensitized, you don't have fear. And fear is a good thing, because fear keeps you on your toes. And if you are not on your toes and you are complacent, then you get sloppy. And that's where I think, I mean, they had, and coincidentally enough, all over the Marine Basin, anything that dealt with Marines, there was always reminders: complacency kills. Complacency kills. Always be vigilant, keeping on your guard and alert all the time.
Right.
So
now, kind of shifting over to a new area, while you were in Iraq and while you were away from home, how were you able to stay in touch with your friends, your family?
well, we had access to email. We had a lovely device called the Iridium satellite phone, which is a very hot commodity. If a particular individual or unit had access to that, that was a very highly coveted item that everyone wanted to use for obvious reasons. The second time around, we actually had set up phone centers, AT&T phone centers. And that always used to bother me, because I thought, you know, like, it's important for Marines to keep in contact with people back home, and I thought they would, you know, cut Marines concessions, but it was like you'd get a $40 AT&T card, and it would only last you like 15 to 20 minutes. And, you know,
Right.
It seems like 5 minutes of time on the phone is at the same time an eternity of pleasure, and yet it goes by so quickly. So, I mean, and then of course we always had snail mail, so you could always write your write letters. There was no postage and stuff. And I think the sinful thing for me and the Marines is that we always liked getting mail, but we never liked sending mail. Because it's always like, we always loved care packages. The first time we got a care package, it was like, oh my God, it was like Christmas. So they're opening up beef jerky, this, toys, you know, food this, food that, video games, all sorts of crazy stuff. And then after a while, you get into this huge surplus of like packages, and you're like, put it in the pile, take what you want, throw it out. Nobody cared. Nobody wants packages anymore. But, you know, it was always a good thing at mail call to get some mail. I mean, like I said, it was selfish, I think, that nobody likes sending mail, because that actually required effort to kind of sit down, collect your thoughts. And really, because you don't want to.
Right.
I mean, you've gone through a whole day, and I think the last thing you want to do is explain what you had to do that you may have agreed or disagreed with, and sending it not out to one person, or sending the same story over to a bunch of people. So typically when we sent mail, it was kind of say, hey, I'm alive, doing okay, staying motivated, send me this, this, and this. Love you, take care. So we always like getting mail, we just never really like to send it.
Right.
So, were there any people in your unit that you established really close friendships with, and that, you know, you would still talk to today?
Absolutely. That's the unique thing about the Marine Corps, is that, and probably all branches of the armed forces, is that the people that you come into contact with and have to experience the same hardships, you forge very close relationships. You know, the whole thing is that you focus on your job, but you don't have to worry what's behind you, because you know you can trust the guy behind you to watch your back. And again, like, you know, if everyone, there was a saying that I always used to like when we did a forced march in North Carolina through a swamp. And the colonel was like, we're going to improve unit cohesion through shared suffering and misery. And I always believe that, because that's what the Marines is, like boot camp. They strip you all down, they shave your heads, they thrash you around. All of a sudden you start coming closer together as a group, as you can identify, and you're in a situation where it's life and death. So everyone that I've ever served with, lifelong friends. And the weird thing is, like, I don't talk to a lot of my friends who I've served with over there, but it's like, without a shadow of a doubt, you could pick up the phone, they call you, you call them, and it's just like you catch them like you haven't missed a beat. I had a staff sergeant who I served with over there, who was the operations chief and I was the assistant. he called me up on Thanksgiving, and I'm like, I hadn't talked to him in a long time, and it was like, you know, hey, how's it going? Like, you don't need to like maintain, like, I'm calling for my phone call of the month to make sure everything's okay. There's just like this understanding, like, yeah, he's a Marine, I'm a Marine, there's an identification, we were in the same unit, he knows me, what we did for each other and what we did for everyone else. It's a lifelong friendship. You know, like I said, I could go 20 years, I could disappear for 20 years and come back in 20 years and pick up the phone to the people I was with and be just like that.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'd like to thank you, Mr. Finsel, for all your stories that you've shared with us today. We'd like to thank you at home, and hopefully we will see you again.